My name is Jeff Stamm. I was a DEA agent from 1984 to 2015, having served in a number of domestic and foreign assignments. It was a tremendous career, hopefully making a difference to the American citizens and the world. DEA's global mission is important for one simple reason, because the threat is global. Aside from some domestic marijuana and diverted pharmaceuticals, the vast majority of all illegal drugs trafficked to Americans comes from a foreign source, whether it's Colombian cocaine, Mexican methamphetamine, Afghan heroin, Israeli MDMA, to name just a few. All of those having a foreign source, it's imperative that DEA be able to work the highest level violators all throughout that continuum, right up to the very sources of supply in those foreign countries. And as DEA does so, by the way, it also simultaneously engages in host nation capacity building programs, providing training and equipment, usually with our partners from the U.S. Department of State, to make those law enforcement organizations internationally more effective, more efficient for their citizens, for their regions, and in turn, the world. And as a corollary to that, the global presence of DEA, in terms of diversity of workforce, there's no other agency in Washington, D.C. that has more historical, linguistic, and cultural understanding as an organization that is incredibly useful right here at home, given our increasing diversity in our own social landscape. Let me answer the question about DEA's contributions to American safety and security by giving you two very specific examples. In 2011, an Iranian national by the name of Mansour Arbabsiar, working for the elite Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, their IRGC, traveled to South Texas to contract a hit team from the Mexican Zetas drug cartel to kill Prince Al-Jubair, Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the U.S., based in Washington, D.C. The plan was for $1.5 million that Zeta's hit squad would blow up a Washington, D.C. restaurant that the prince frequented every single night, caring not one whit about how many Americans would also die in the process. DEA was able to penetrate that drug narco-terrorist conspiracy and prevent what clearly would have been a catastrophic terrorist event in our nation's capital. If you're looking for a very graphic example of the intersection of drugs and terrorism, there it is right there. A second example was also in 2011, involving the very sophisticated sting operation by DEA to arrest Victor Bout, aka the Merchant of Death. Former Russian intelligence officer turned one of the most prolific arms dealers in the world. In fact, at the height of his activity, he was flying as many as 6 Ilyushin 76 Russian cargo planes a day into Afghanistan, supplying the Taliban with weapons, military equipment, and other goods. Where he really ran afoul of U.S. law, however, was when he agreed to sell shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles to the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, communist narco-terrorist guerrillas, specifically to shoot down American aircraft engaged in assisting the Colombian government in fighting drug trafficking and terrorism in their country. But in addition to just those two specific examples, the daily activities of DEA and their 80-plus offices throughout the world in intercepting drug loads and destroying drug labs, attacking money laundering organizations, even human and weapons trafficking organizations, every single one of those actions designed to make America and our fellow citizens much safer from drug trafficking and the narco-terrorist threat. On September 11th, 2001, I was the DEA regional attaché based in Islamabad, Pakistan, having regional authority for not just our 2 offices in Pakistan, Islamabad and Peshawar, but also Afghanistan, 5 Central Asian states, and parts of the Middle East. 9/11 didn't just change the world, it completely refocused mine, as well as DEA's immediate tasks right next door in Afghanistan. It's little remembered today, though. However, prior to 9/11, DEA had collected incontrovertible intelligence that bin Laden and his terrorist fighters were supporting themselves inside Afghanistan by providing security to heroin labs and drug shipments out of Afghanistan, principally into Pakistan's northwest frontier province and Baluchistan regions. In fact, we'd also developed some pretty credible information that bin Laden himself actually financed individual heroin shipments into Western Europe for distribution there. So, with all the evil acts committed by Osama bin Laden, and they are legion, at bottom he was also just a common drug dealer. But DEA at the time was also building cases against all the major narco-terrorist warlords in Afghanistan. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, the Pashtun, Burhanuddin Rabbani, the Tajik, Abdul Rashid Dostum, the Uzbek, and so many others. In fact, I remember having a conversation with the head of Pakistan's ANF, their anti-narcotics force, about the clan and tribal nature of Afghan society at that time, and I asked him who he thought the elders of the tribal elders were there, and without skipping a beat, he said, "Oh, that's easy. It's the drug traffickers." Now, at the time, the only U.S. government agency with any human intelligence inside Afghanistan was DEA. Following the end of the Cold War in 1991, our intelligence community and military, at least in that part of the world, had focused mainly upon high technology platforms, signals intercepts, satellite imagery. So DEA, with our collection of confidential informants and sources of information, contacts with tribal elders, even Taliban officials at that time, enabled us to be uniquely poised to provide some truly outsized contributions in those early days of America's more critical war on terror. As U.S. military and coalition forces began military action inside Afghanistan, DEA was actually able to provide direct intelligence nearly daily on not just the location and movement of al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters inside Afghanistan, but also detailed information on scores of them fleeing Afghanistan across the Pakistani border, allowing our partners in the Pakistani ISI, their inter-services intelligence, to scoop them up by the droves and hand them off to American forces. Outside of a small interagency group inside the U.S. Embassy there at the time, DEA would never really be publicly recognized for those early contributions in America's war on terror in that region. But you know what? That was actually a situation that suited the agency just fine, given our institutional culture of quiet professionalism. In early December 2001, we actually had one of our informants in the Peshawar office up on the Afghan border contact our office there, stating that just 48 hours prior, he had personally seen Osama bin Laden at a place called Tora Bora, in extreme northeastern Afghanistan, very close to the Pakistani border. So we immediately threw him in a car, drove him down to Islamabad, and made him available to our partners in the U.S. Embassy. About 72 hours later, American B-52s decimated Tora Bora in one of the largest airstrikes of that entire war. And of course, they followed it up with U.S. ground troops from the U.S. Army Special Forces and identified dozens of dead al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters. Unfortunately, Osama bin Laden would not be among them. That would actually take another decade and SEAL Team 6 to finish that job. In mid-December 2001, just 3 days after the U.S. government had, U.S. military, along with some assistance from our Northern Alliance, captured the capital city, Kabul. The U.S. ambassador at that time contacted me and asked if I'd be willing to jump in with a small group of civilians to reestablish our U.S. embassy there in Kabul. An embassy, by the way, that had been closed since 1979, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. How's that for the arc of history? Well, of course, I jumped at the chance, and I found myself that very night on a U.S. Air Force C-130 out of Rawalpindi Air Base in Pakistan right into downtown Kabul. When I got there, I was met by a company of Marines who had established a defensive perimeter on that small piece of land inside downtown Kabul that would once again be considered sovereign American territory. By the way, if you ever want to meet some of the finest human beings on the planet, introduce yourself to a grunt Marine. On December 17th, 2001, just 9 weeks after 9/11, and a very impressive 23 days after the introduction of U.S. ground forces in Afghanistan, the American flag was raised once again over the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan. CNN was actually there to film the event. I was also there, representing not only DEA, but my country. It was one of the greatest honors of my life. And from that point on, DEA began to build its presence and capacities inside Afghanistan to once again conduct the business of drug law enforcement for the nation, as well as to simultaneously build up from scratch the Afghan National Police Forces, right up until our suboptimal departure from the entire country in 2021. You know, most people have no idea how truly dangerous the world has become, how many people and organizations are actively trying to prey upon and destroy our nation and our citizens. They need to be taught not only how complex and dangerous this threat actually is, the drug threat, but how DEA over the years has worked along with our partners, both foreign and domestic, some of them having made the ultimate sacrifice to keep our world and our nation safer from drugs and crime and terrorism. DEA has long had a presence in the Middle East, given that region's importance to global heroin trafficking, as well as its nexus to narcoterrorism. In fact, roughly half of all of our foreign terrorist organizations throughout the world have been definitively linked to the drug trade. But I think most people need to understand that terrorism is not a specific entity, nor is it even a particular organization. It's a tactic. And it's a tactic being employed every day by not only groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, but also by Mexican cartels and Venezuelan gangs to better move drugs into the U.S. and to engage in organized crime on a global scale. And specific to that terrorist group Hezbollah, that Lebanese group of Shiites, long supported by their big brothers in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, their IRGC, we've known for a couple of decades now that Hezbollah has actively conspired with Mexican cartels to finance multi-ton loads of cocaine from Colombia into Mexico for distribution in the U.S. and throughout the world. So once again, that marriage of drug trafficking and terrorism has been hugely detrimental to not just the U.S., but the world. Between 2002 and 2004, I was privileged to serve as DEA's Deputy Chief of International Operations based in Washington, D.C. And in that position, I had come to learn three irrefutable truths. Number one, nobody does it better than DEA. As one Washington commentator said years ago, pound for pound, dollar for dollar, there's no other three-letter agency in our nation's security apparatus that does more to provide safety and security and save more lives than DEA. I think that's true, despite meager budgets and schizophrenic policy shifts and occasionally some tremendous political attacks upon our nation's law enforcement professionals. Unfortunately, sometimes those attacks even coming from our own elected officials. But DEA has always just focused on the mission, embodying dedication, perseverance, professionalism, a kind of bureaucratic agility, and always a deep respect for the rule of law. And although great challenges do remain, tremendous successes have been achieved. There is no such thing as the French Connection anymore. Pablo Escobar is dead. Chapo Guzman sits in an American supermax prison. The Cali and Medellin cartels are extinct. Kun Sa's Golden Triangle heroin empire is no more. Narco-terrorists like Haji Bashir Nourzai from Afghanistan, for a time, the largest heroin trafficker in the world, is out of business. Dozens of major Mexican cartel bosses have been killed or captured. And right here at home, organizations like the Hells Angels and Crips and Bloods are mere husks of their former selves. All of them targeted and prosecuted by DEA and their partners. Number two, there is no more globalized industry than the drug trade. As drug traffickers parasitically take advantage of globalized commerce, banking, shipping, and communications, DEA has had to constantly adapt to their adversaries with innovation, imagination, improvisation, pushing every investigation as far upstream as possible, most of those having international sources. But because DEA is a law enforcement organization and not merely an intelligence collection outfit, the goal of every investigation is to prosecute those organizations and narco-terrorist members in U.S. courts. But occasionally the discovery process allows the bad guys to learn how the narcs have penetrated their organization, allowing them to adapt, clearly giving them some advantages. But it also forces DEA and their partners to engage in counter-adaptations, further innovations. It's been described as the new great game, played out not only in places like Afghanistan and Colombia, but also in Atlanta and Columbus. Number three, the drug crisis is not and never has been solely an American crisis. The more one understands about the nature of this drug threat, the more one realizes that every nation on the planet has been affected by the drug scourge. Every drug crisis in every society, in every age, is driven by two things: drug availability and drug acceptability. And although I think it's everyone's responsibility to push back against that latter one there, the acceptability of drug use and drug dealing, there's only one entity that can effectively push back against the first one. That's law enforcement. Local, state, federal, international law enforcement. DEA has been incredibly effective at partnering with every single one of those levels, but probably most especially in the foreign arena. And by the way, all three of those truths are still true today.